Maelstrom News fans, obviously the gigantic news that's flying around the entire world right now is the announcement by the UK that it is going to be leaving the European Union. Now, I, like many other people, were actually completely blown away by the fact that this happened. I did not see this coming. I really thought that it would be close, but the UK would be staying in the EU. And of course, well, I've certainly been proven wrong along with a lot of other people. Now, obviously, UKIP's Nigel Farage is really, really happy about this because this was an issue that he was pushing, very, very hard. He called it the UK's Independence Day. Well, come on, Farage. This really isn't an Independence Day. It's a vote against something you don't like. This is really not comparable to the American Revolution, which, of course, it seems to be that's the kind of image that he's invoking by using the term Independence Day. I mean, this is just a vote where, independence from the EU hasn't actually been gained. It was just a vote on whether or not people should leave, which, by the way, it's a non-binding vote. The ruling class within the UK can still choose to ignore it. Now, the referendum turnout was about 71.8%, or 30 million more people than the highest turnout ever in the UK voting since 1992. Now, there's already been at least 100,000 people who have already asked for there to be a second vote. And very interestingly, those who voted against leaving the EU, like the highest concentration of them, were in Northern Ireland and Scotland. So this does demonstrate that there is still a divide among the people of the UK of whether or not to stay. And those do take quasi-nationalist lines. It is obviously, Northern Ireland and Scotland, which are both parts of the UK, but not part of the whole mainland structure that is, Great Britain or England or what have you. But there's something else that people need to keep in mind about this vote. Article 50 of the Treaty on the European Union establishes the procedures for a member state to withdraw from the EU. It requires member states to notify the EU of its withdrawal and obliges the EU to try to negotiate a withdrawal agreement with them. Now, a Brexit vote, however, does not represent that formal notification. That notification could take place within days. For example, in the EU, member countries meet for a summit that is scheduled for June 28 to 29. Or the British officials might wait a few months to pull the trigger. However, once Britain invokes Article 50, they will have a 2-year window in which to negotiate a treaty to replace the terms of EU membership. Britain and EU leaders would have to hash out issues like trade tariffs, migration and regulation of everything from cars to agriculture. Any deal must be approved by all 27 countries, several of which do little trade with Britain. So I think that's something to keep in mind here. No formal declaration of leaving the EU has actually been made by the UK government, which means that's, still to come. Now, which means they have 2 years to negotiate a withdrawal. Obviously, you can't just suddenly leave. All of a sudden, there's too many economic and political connections there that would make it difficult. So you have a 2-year area for which to negotiate a withdrawal. Now, as I previously said, the majority of those 27 other nations don't have a lot of business with the UK, which means they could possibly postpone things for a very, very long time. It could take months, even the full 2 years to negotiate a withdrawal. Because since they're really not losing anything, like the UK could obviously turn around and cut trade with them, lower stuff, with all kinds of ways that they could mess with them. But since they don't do much trade with them at all, there's not much that the UK could actually do to them. So we could have a situation where the government doesn't even make the formal declaration of leaving, invoking Article 50. Or they could invoke it, and those in the EU member states that are opposed to it could end up just dragging their feet on it and never actually approving a deal for them to leave. Now, it should be noted that whenever you have a situation like this, politics is inseparable from economics, and this vote certainly had that effect. During the Asian trading day, the pound plunged against the dollar by over 10% to $1.32, which is a 30-year low. It fell far harder against the yen, and frequent bolt holes for the anxious investors have started flocking to the safety of U.S. treasuries. As Europe's markets opened, the main stock indices followed the lead set overnight in Asia and fell by around 10%. Britain accounts for just 3.9% of the world's output. It is not big enough to make a global economic weather in the way America or China could. Most economists agree with the Treasury that the British economy is now likely to fall into recession. Obviously, the currency has recovered since then, and that, because England is not, the UK is not the manufacturing powerhouse that it used to be, because like the United States, much of that is outsourced to places like China and India. Now, the money has recovered a good deal since then, so it's not like the currency is going to crash and there's going to be some kind of massive deflation or inflation, depending on how you want to see it. As to how bad the recession could be, I frankly don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. I don't think that the recession would really be that bad. So I think they're kind of exaggerating it a bit, just for the sake of trying to push towards the no vote, to vote to stay. Obviously, there will be some impacts, but they're not going to be that great. Some people like Chris Hedges have claimed that this is going to be it. This is going to be the big recession that catalyzes revolution in the UK, and I frankly think that's completely nonsense. I mean, there's not going to be any kind of a crash anywhere near that kind of situation to really polarize a class identity. We should also keep in mind that a great deal of this whole vote, as far as the masses of the UK are concerned, is largely racial. So I wouldn't expect any kind of big thing to suddenly materialize out of that. He does note, however, that there are many people who hold foreign currencies, and this kind of vote severely hurt them, and that he said this is going to be what precipitates the UK into crisis. It's going to send the financial sector of the country into a crisis. Frankly, I don't believe that. I just don't see it happening because the effect hasn't been that great. So I think he's really overestimating that. I mean, Chris Hedges has overestimated a lot of things in the past, like Occupy Wall Street and the recent Black Lives Matter movement. He's exaggerated them beyond because he's still of like the first worldist mindset. But something that I think is really important about this whole thing is the way that it has affected David Cameron's career. David Cameron, the Prime Minister of the UK, has announced that he's going to step down. I believe it's in November that he's going to do so. Now, the main reason that this is going to happen, or why this has had such a significant enough of an impact to seriously harm his political career, is the fact that it was his job to get the no vote. And he said that he failed. He didn't get it. And people voted just slightly in favor of leaving. In other words, he didn't do his job. And this was the one thing that his career was really hinging on, given a lot of the negative attention that he's received, like particularly almost wishing death on anybody who has a disability or putting his genitals in a pig's mouth. There's been all a number of negative consequences for him and his political career thus far, that this is certainly more than enough to push it over the top to where he's going to have to sit down. Now, I think one big thing that a lot of people aren't keeping in mind is that this is going to hurt Jeremy Corbyn too. Now, Corbyn has his particular position, and the way that he acts within his party, he's been very dismissive and unsupportive of a lot of the people that are, higher up in him, that have more influence, etc. He's really blazed his own path. He would be an example of doing too little, too late. And this is really going to significantly affect his political career. This could force him into possibly some kind of state of resignation as well. I mean, it remains to be seen what's actually going to happen. This is obviously not the same kind of situation that David Cameron is in, but it's certainly going to have its effect on his career as well. Now, for the average person inside the UK, I don't think much is really going to change day to day. Obviously, there are issues with currency. in that this could raise the price of imports, and considering that the UK does have a lot of imports, as most first world countries do, there could be a serious consequence for this. Now, the real serious consequence would be after leaving, because, I mean, really, who knows what the countries in the EU that export to the UK, who knows what they're going to do at this point? I mean, what's going through people's minds? A lot of governments might start looking for ways to start punishing the UK for daring to really leave the whole deal. But on the whole, I very seriously doubt that day-to-day life for people in the UK is going to change after this vote. And even if there was an exit, I don't really think that there would be, that much of a difference. There would be an adjustment period going through changing things and all that. But generally speaking, everything would stay pretty much the same. It should be noted that, obviously it's inescapable to acknowledge that a lot of this has been over immigration. And I think this immigration issue is largely one that is fed to people. Like, this isn't really what the exit is about, but this is the justification or the reasons that are being given to the public. What was it? More than half of the 330,000 net immigrants that came into the UK during 2015 came from outside the EU. And this, of course, invokes many of the very horrible racist images that we've been getting, particularly from UKIP, where it's the Muzzies coming in, taking over, taking our jobs, and, Sharia law, Muslimic ray guns. We've all seen that video, etc. I think a lot of the hyperbole around this situation has been deliberately put around the issue of immigration to obscure the real reason. So it can be you're either racist or you're not racist. But I think what matters is the real reason why this is happening. Of course, the ruling class is concerned somewhat about the effects of migrants coming into the country. But overall, this really has to do with a conflict within the ruling class itself. There are sections of the capitalist class that want to stay and a section that wants to leave. And obviously, both of these sides, from the vote we can tell, are very powerful. And this time, the leave portion of it won. Because a big part of what the whole European Union was supposed to be was a manner of pooling resources, currencies, and whatnot, economic power, towards competing with the United States. Each individual EU state can't compete with the US on any meaningful level. Even the UK itself still has to play a second fiddle role towards the United States. So the point is, shared benefit, shared gain, shared risk. In theory, of course, one group of people always wins and one group of people always loses. The situation I think that we're in now is that the UK doesn't want to be holding the bag for the loss. Because a lot of the people who have been talking about leaving, that would be Germany and the UK, and to some extent France and Italy, they're the ones that weathered the Great Recession well enough that they've recovered. They're still strong. Meanwhile, all the other member states are still losing, and they're expected to help pick up the slack or to help out those who have lost, particularly with Greece. Although Greece is a bit of an exception. They're trying to escape their liabilities as opposed to being made liable for the collapse of others. And there are capitalists that just don't want to do it. They don't want to put up with it. They don't want this affecting them in any kind of policy that would harm their businesses. And there's some that say that they need to stay in the EU in order to continue their business. So this, in the end, I believe very little has to do with the actual immigration issue, although that's what has been fed to the regular low-level people in the country. This really is a contradiction among the ruling class, and that's largely, what this is about. And as I said previously, there's already been a call to have another vote on it, to vote to stay, which to me seems kind of odd, knowing that this vote isn't actually binding in any real serious way. I mean, they can vote on all they want. It doesn't mean they're going to do anything. However, there is one interesting aspect of this, is that WikiLeaks has said that this is good for Julian Assange. Now, you'll recall he's the founder of WikiLeaks. He leaked a whole bunch of documents exposing a lot of things, like particularly collateral murder, linked to Chelsea Manning and all that. And you'll know that he was accused of rape and that he's been staying in the Ecuadorian embassy in the UK for many years now. Now, one of the things that's very interesting, if the UK does end up leaving, he could possibly walk out of that embassy a free man. Keep in mind, his arrest warrant is for the EU, not the UK. So technically, the warrant that is out for his arrest would no longer be valid where he is. He could walk out of the embassy, get on a plane, and leave, go somewhere else, wherever it is that he wants to go. I'm not saying anything in support of him or against him because of the rape allegations. I'm merely stating the actual legal situation that he's in right now. So this could be a great thing for him. He could be just walking out at this point. Now, I think in the overall, what does this really mean? Well, we understand the primary contradiction is imperialism. And by having the UK leave the EU, it's a small act of undermining the power of the EU, which in itself is in a complicated situation, but it is still an imperialist power. It still benefits from the plunder of the third world. So what it is a slight undermining of the power of the empire. It's not terribly all that significant, really, because the UK still has all its military force and relatively still has, all of its economic power, etc., depending on whether or not they leave. And even if they do leave, frankly, it's not going to make much of a difference. It's a very small step towards breaking up the empire. So it's not much, but it is definitely a step in the right direction. So either it could possibly turn into a crisis that would stimulate class war within the UK, although I very seriously doubt that that's the case. It would at least have some very minimal effect of minimizing or having some slight decrease in the imperialist power of the UK, which goes good for third world people. But as I said, the decrease would be very minor, but it would, however, be a step in the right direction. So that's really the points that I wanted to make surrounding the whole vote about leaving the European Union. And again, I apologize for my computer having gone down and not doing this video earlier. But so I think in the end, this is still a positive thing for the oppressed people of the third world, even if it is only a slight shift in their direction. Thank you for watching. Won't you go ahead, rate, comment, subscribe, and share on various social media. And if you want, you can head over to my Patreon page and show your support. Or you could head over to the MRN bookstore and check out some of the latest books available.